I'm your host, Grayson Brulte. Welcome to another episode of SAE Tomorrow Today, a show about emerging technology and trends in mobility with leaders and innovators to make it all happen. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to be joined by Gabe Klein, co-founder, Adapt Impact, and CityFi, and former executive director of the U.S. Joint Office of Energy and Transportation. On today's episode, we'll explore how cities in the EV sector must adapt as federal support fades, shifting towards locally driven, financially sustainable solutions. We hope you enjoy this episode. Gabe, welcome to the podcast.
Grayson, thanks so much for having me.
It's great to have you here. We're going to get into my favorite topic, the curb, a little bit later, but I want to start with a presentation that you recently gave. In that presentation, you said, the era of relying on Washington is ending. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so let's look at our friends over in China, for instance, right? Where they have vertically integrated supply chains, massive government support. And look, there are shortcomings to some of that. I'm not saying, that is necessarily always great, but we are competing against that, right? And so when you look at the three bills that were passed in 2021, the CHIPS Act, the IRA, the IIJA, they were structured deliberately to work together, right? And they were designed to impact everything from minerals and supply of minerals and production of minerals to industrial policy and manufacturing here in the US, all the way down to consumer demand for those products made in the US. Were they perfect? No, of course not. But by rolling that back, it's really tough. It's tough for a lot of reasons. One is companies were relying on that. They don't like uncertainty. That's number one. Number two, consumers don't either. And then number three, there's our reputation. And so when I said you can't rely on the federal government going forward, what I meant was you could have a friendly administration come in next, but the election of Trump twice shows us in the US now, as well as the rest of the world, that this is our new reality. And we may have more extreme leadership at times, and therefore we're not going to have the consistency. And so if you're building like they do in Japan, they have 100-year plans in their companies. You got to rely on yourselves, and you got to rely on local government, state government, private money, right?
Hey, the thing with Washington, though, you still need some of the permitting still has to go through Washington. The thing that I think a lot about is the critical mineral refining. And it's still, no matter what, if you're going to put it into EVs, you're going to put it in other use cases throughout the economy, we still need the refining. And then that seems like the whole conversation around critical mineral refining has kind of gone, if you want to use the term, vanished.
Yeah. Well, like I said, there's a lack of consistency, and there's a lack also of depth of thought. So we say that we are tripling down on AI at the federal level, but one of the biggest manifestations of AI is vehicles. It's electric autonomous vehicles, right? We're not going to have AI ICE vehicles. It's not going to happen. So we're sort of talking out of both sides of our mouth. We're saying a lot of different things, and innovation is innovation. And if you're pro-innovation, then you got to be pro-mineral refining. You have to be consistent about it so investments can be made. And you have to be pro-electrification and renewable energy, which you need not just to power the hyperscaling and all the things that AI itself and the cloud rely on, but also the manifestations of that, which includes electric vehicles of all types.
Do you see any, if you want to call it, cracks emerging? Because the conversation, and I'll just use Bloomberg and CNBC, like the general news channels, for example, was all around, it's large language models. It's the Anthropic, OpenAI back and forth. But now you're starting to see physical AI is now entering that mainstream conversation. And you and I both know the role that minerals, magnets, and all the, if you want to call it the componentry and chips go into physical AI. Does that start opening a crack where there is, from a policy perspective, people starting to look at this differently? Because if you want to say the narrative is shifting towards physical AI, well, it's still early, but does that help move it, do you think?
Yeah, I think last year we were seeing the sort of AI fluff model, when I think the peak of it was when OpenAI introduced Sora, and you're like, really? This is the best we can come up with? Come on, we're going to create AI slop and that's going to be a business. So yeah, I think the industry was sort of struggling, and this is what happens when you have a hype cycle, and then eventually you settle into how are we realistically going to make money on this, and a lot of it's going to be in enhancing business processes, right? It's going to be taking the existing processes that are out there, making them much more efficient, work much better. The only reason we're in this situation with robotaxis is that this investment was made by the federal government and DARPA, back in the mid 2000s. Google X ran with it. And now you've got this physical manifestation, which under normal circumstances wouldn't have happened without government R&D and intervention, right? So it's fascinating to watch people react to the potential of AVs in their community and the role of AI in that, and sort of trying to figure out the difference between that and then like ChatGPT and what's happening online. But I do think, to your actual question, yeah, I think the hype cycles are going to fall apart this year. And it's like, do you have something real that we can utilize? Right. And some of that's going to be just infrastructure based, like LiDAR, which has been overlooked for the last few years as being important, like the actual sensor technology. And then some of it's going to be the compute for that sensor tech. But that's going to dramatically change people's lives. Now, is there enough money in that to justify the investments that they're making? That I don't know.
If Bloomberg and CNBC are right, for example, OpenAI and Anthropic are going to go public. And if that's the case, then we're going to have audited financial data to look at to answer your question. But there's no denying this. AI is integrating into workflows across the world. If you're not a business, you're not integrating it, you're not embracing it, you're going to be left behind. And then there's cities, as you know this, and I know this, they tend to move very slow. And in some cases, there's a lot of bureaucracy and they move very slow. How are cities thinking about AI? Have you seen any really interesting use cases where cities saying, you know what, the heck with the old way of doing things, let's embrace something? I've been following what San Jose's been doing. It seems like they're leaning into all this different tech, and they've been doing it for years and years and doing a really great job at it. But what are some of the great use cases that you're seeing with cities embracing AI?
Yes, there are cities like San Jose, like Bellevue, Washington. I mean, there are places that, or even Miami-Dade County with their chief innovation officer, that are doing really great things, and they're testing it. And to be honest with you, sometimes we think cities are far behind. I would argue in some cases they're further ahead on the use cases than the folks at like OpenAI. What's really interesting is there's an inherent tension, right? Like even here in DC, our mayor is cautious, and I think rightfully so, about AVs and robotaxis. She's sort of got a wait and see approach. But some of that is the tension between job loss, right, and gig workers who are a larger and larger part of our economy and rely on the ability to make money, driving. And so we know that long term, a lot of those jobs are going to evaporate, but it's a very real tension in cities trying to figure out how do you limit the job losses and enhance the sort of accretive, right, like task reduction, if you will, for jobs, right? Like that's a good thing. There was an ad on the Super Bowl last night about somebody using AI so they could take a few days off. I mean, that's great. But I think that what I've seen is, and what I've been involved with, is AI at the curb. And the curb is so important because it's one of these last bastions in cities that states can't really control and the federal government can't control. Local government will always control the curb. And so using AI at the curb, where like right now, 4% generally of people actually pay at loading zones, obey the actual loading zone rules. And so by taking that to 94% almost overnight using AI at the curb, I mean, there's huge enhancements to public space, to quality of life, to throughput, and also to coffers because people are actually paying for the time they use.
So how do you see that being managed? Is that a camera system that feeds into an LLM, or how do you see that being managed?
Yeah. So the company I'm on the board of is called Automotus, and nobody else is really doing exactly what they do. There's like Hayden AI, you may have heard of, that also does something like this, but on buses. This is on fixed infrastructure in a city, typically on it could be a streetlight pole, utility pole. You mount a few cameras per block. You start by targeting those loading zones or pickup drop-off zones, commercial zones, where people are like, where you need turnover, right? And businesses rely on that turnover. And so in most cities, the majority of people parked in those loading zones are not conducting business. They're just parking and they're breaking the law and they're not paying. And so by putting in these cameras and saying, hey, we're going to allow you to pay by the minute, 5 cents, 3 cents, 10 cents, it can be dynamic. It can grow over time. So it could be 10 cents the first 10 minutes, 20 cents the next 10 minutes, 30 cents, because you want that turnover, right? And it's hugely impactful. In Pittsburgh, they've seen basically double parking in their commercial corridor go away. And that's huge because if you have one car blocking a lane of traffic at rush hour, you can back up for miles, right? And so whether it's greenhouse gas emissions, whether it's congestion and getting people to work, whether it's, charging people appropriately at the curb versus punitive fines, right? We can do this with Curb Pass, and it's just like Easy Pass. And I think actually in cities in the future, this will be what you use to pay for all curbside use.
When does it get built into the car where the car knows you're on the curb, your credit card's already in the car? Because to me, for this to really scale, you got to eliminate the friction, because now you got to get out your phone, try and remember your license plate, go to the sign, type in the thing, and it's a big pain in the you-know-what. If it's integrated in the car, okay, sure, fine. This is easy.
Well, two things. We've already solved that because with Curb Pass, when you pull in, the AI knows what kind of vehicle it is. It can tell if it's Lyft or Uber or Amazon or whatever, and it can read your license plate, right? So literally you pull in and you get out and walk away. That's it. There is nothing else. Now, in the future, should there be an API in the car? Sure. I mean, that's very easy to do, but it's really not even needed. And so, in the future, whether it's limited traffic zones, congestion pricing, you just need that one camera to do all the things, right? And it's really just line of sight. And with solar, in many cases, the cameras don't even need to be plugged in. So it's like it's getting better and better and better. And cities don't have the ability to deploy endless amounts of personnel to go out there. And by the way, get abused on the streets or in the cold or in the heat. Why do that? You can elevate those people to a desk job, reviewing the camera shots and the video and analyzing it and approving citations or thinking about how we want to manage the curb more or expanding loading zones, right? So we can move people into better and better jobs too, instead of job loss.
Do you see dynamic pricing and then only certain times of the day, certain vehicles? So let's just say, I don't know, 7:30 a.m. It's the UPS FedEx drop-off time. And then at, say, 8:30 a.m. it's consumer stuff. And then for the pickup, some businesses, I don't know, 4:30, 5 o'clock, they have pickup where their packages go out. Do you see sort of like a dynamic potentially happening?
Absolutely. So for one thing, as I mentioned before, we're seeing progressive pricing sometimes. So people are charging more and more as more time goes by because the loading zone is for loading. It's not for just parking. So that's one thing. I was talking actually to a leader in a major city the other day about this exactly. And they're looking at the bulk of the UPS in a particular area of the city and FedEx is like 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. Then they got gig and pickup drop off for like dinner into the evening. And then, you may just have straight Uber and Lyft at, later in the evening. So there's a couple of ways you can handle that. You can just say, hey, we're just going to have one price. We're going to allow all those. It's going to be a pickup drop off zone. Or in the case of this city, they actually want to say this is for commercial loading and unloading during these daytime hours, but then it's general pickup drop off for the rest. You'll pay the same thing either way.
Do you see potentially valet zones being converted into, if you want to call these smart loading zones? Because some of the valet people, they get feisty if you get dropped off with an Uber and a Lyft there. They start having a cow and screaming at you. But I'm like, oh, it's public property. I'm sorry. Do you see any of that getting converted at all?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of valet zones. In fact, when I was in Chicago running that DOT 13 years ago, we were talking about that. And actually the alderman for the downtown was like, why don't we just make these valet zones, PUDO zones? So yes, we need more flexibility at the curb. We need people to pay for the use of it. But in some cases, somebody providing a commercial activity like Uber Lyft or Grubhub or whatever doesn't have commercial plates. And so you have to have flexibility. Now, it doesn't mean like if you have 2/3 of a block face that you've converted to pick up drop off, you could still say, these two spaces are dedicated for commercial loading during the day and the rest is pick up drop off. And the whole thing is pick up drop off, after 5 o'clock. So there are a number of ways you can do it.
How do you deal with the growing trend of delivery and food delivery, in particular the Dashers, the Uber Eat folks, where they go into, sometimes they're in there 15, 20 minutes waiting for the food, or there's some confusion and it's not in and out. And in an ideal world, yep, okay, it's in and out, but in real world, it could be quite a while. How do you put that into the equation?
What's sort of interesting is in denser cities, and I would say here in Washington, D.C., where I sit, the majority of these people are using scooters and e-bikes now. In fact, the e-bikes have just like exploded recently. There's a particular model even that I see a lot of people using. It's got beefy wheels, monocoque frame. And so I think that's great because those folks can pull up and you can get 10 scooters in a parking space or e-bikes, and it's much more efficient. It's not blocking the roadway. I think where people get really annoyed is the double parking with the blinkers. And so like with the automotive system, by the way, those people get ticketed. It tickets double parking. This is if the city wants. It tickets blocking the bike lane. It can ticket block the box. So any of those things, right? And what you see is that behavior goes away. Now, that's a stick, but then I think it's incumbent upon the city to look at the changes, right, in commerce and say, well, okay, maybe we need more pickup drop off, right? Maybe we need, 15-minute maxes or 30-minute maxes. Maybe we need to allow scooters and bikes to pay as well, right? So, or we say, hey, if you're using a scooter bike, we really like that, so we're not going to charge you.
Do you see those policies being set at the city council level? Is that where you see them being set and implemented?
Yep. City council, mayor's office. Depends a little bit, strong mayor, weak mayor, but absolutely. Yeah, that's at the city level, and that's not going to change.
So then if you want to call it, you adapt the curve for the 21st century, then where does charging come in? Where do you see electric vehicle charging? Traditionally, you and I both know a lot of it's done in garages. Do you see any of that potentially moving to the curb where you want to call it EV charging spots and perhaps you pay a reduced rate maybe?
Yeah, I mean, every city's different. Like some cities have more garages or they have municipally owned garages, like in San Francisco. We don't really have municipally owned garages like here in DC. They have a few in New York. I think you're going to see a combination. So it's a yes and answer. I'm a big fan of level 2 charging and making it ubiquitous. It doesn't mean we don't need DC fast charging. Of course we do. Range anxiety, long trips, 1.6 times a year, the average American family takes a longer road trip. That's not very much. However, they will buy a car based on whether they can make that road trip. So you got to have the extensive charging network. But day to day, it's that ubiquitous level 2, in some cases, smart level 1 charging even in a garage, for instance, that makes the difference. And I do think that over time, you'll start to see it roll out at the curb, just as a utility, like a parking meter, right? And, in the case of like Volt Post, for instance, like it can go up on the pole, you pull in, you hit a button on your phone, the cable comes down, you plug it in, it knows who you are because we have plug and charge, and you just start charging. And I think at some point we'll also have integrated payment potentially for charging and parking. So you can do that all through Curb Pass. It'll be integrated.
I mean, there's certain companies, unfortunately they're not around anymore, where they own lots, especially Miami-Dade, and you get the primo parking if you charge. It was great. It was right there, primo parking, and it was fantastic. And I think it was $3 to pay for the parking versus $10. So it worked there. It's all sorts of incentives. What type of investments are you seeing being made in EV charging? Has it stalled? Is it continuing? Because there's certain companies and developers that I've seen and went wah wah, and then there was one company who, for privacy purposes, remained anonymous, We are the sustainability electric company. Then at CES this year, and you're going to laugh, we are the AI company. I
Oh
was
yeah.
like, boy, oh boy, way to chase trends.
Everybody's an AI company now, right? They don't, some of them may not even know what AI stands for. Just kidding. But I'm seeing a lot of different types of investments. I mean, here's the good news. At like 20% utilization, you can make money. And like on L2 charging, New York City did their test and they had like 76% utilization. And if you add like the 10 to 15% of the time that they were blocked by ICE vehicles, it was like 90% on average. I mean, that's crazy. Or actually not on average in some of the busiest areas. That's a market failure. Like you need a lot more chargers. If you're trying to hit 20 and you're at 90. So the good news is the utilization is there. Perrin put out their report last week, showed like we were nationally at like 16.9%, I think, utilization for DC fast charging. That means there's not many losing money. And there's quite a few making money. So that's good news. That means that we can fund this with private money, right? Now, we always planned that. And when those three bills passed, the plan was for, about 90 some percent of the charging of those 500,000 chargers that we needed to be paid for by the private sector. And then the like NEVI money and the CFI money, all that was gap filling money for those hard locations where it just didn't pencil. But the belief is that having access to electrons for your transportation should be a right, not a privilege, right? And that you should be able to get it even if you live in a rural area. And the majority of that money was targeted to those hard to get to rural areas where you might need a substation upgrade or new transformers. So that's, one side of the coin. We are seeing more investment in L2 charging. I think people are realizing, particularly in cities, like it doesn't have to be super expensive. You can put a pole-based charger up in like 45 to 90 minutes, right? And you can be charging it like 9.6 kilowatts, which gives you 30 to 40 miles per hour. When I was in Europe 2 years ago, looking at their charging, I met with the federal or the national government in England, Netherlands, France, and then also with the big city governments. And they have like 3 kilowatt chargers in some cases. But people are parked in their neighborhood and they put their car in at 7 p.m. and they get out at 9 a.m. and they're getting like 5 miles an hour and that gives them like 60 miles. That's fine. So basically, it's that slow trickle ubiquitous charging. So anytime you park your vehicle, there's a place to park it and just amp it up a little bit, top it off. We need that also. Now, one counterpoint to that is as we get away from vehicle ownership, even bike ownership, right? But definitely car ownership, you are going to need more high-speed charging because the duty cycle is different on a fleet vehicle that's active 95% of the time versus when you own a vehicle, it sits about 95% of the time on average, right? So that will mean more high-speed charging. But the good news is you have companies like Waymo, Terawatt, others, they're making those investments, right? There's a profit motive there. So I'm excited to get to that point on level 2 charging and start to show how you make big money on slow charging.
With the L2 that you described, putting on my city hat, permitting. How does the permitting get sped up? And then this, you run into the not in my backyard.
Yeah.
How do you overcome that?
Well, that's a really interesting question, right? Because in most places, it's not a matter of like, it's not like a matter of right. Like you can just go in and get a permit and put it up on the pole in front of your house because either the city owns the pole or the utility owns the pole, right? Now, in Portland, they do have a permit program, and you can request as a company to put in chargers at poles. And I think that's really interesting. It's a great trial, and we'll see how it works. But in most cases, the city's got to put out an RFP and say, we're looking for a few companies to come in, put in 1,000 chargers, right? And you have to write those contracts in such a way that if somebody goes out of business or there are problems, that there are, SLAs in there, that there are clauses where the infrastructure would revert to the city could rebid the contract for operating. It's not that hard though, and we just need them to do it. Some of them were relying on CFI money or EBC ROM money. That's still uncertain as a court case right now that we're waiting to see the outcome of in terms of money being unfrozen. But they started canceling some of those grants last week, which is not a good sign. And so we need to put the RFP out and let these companies go get private money to do it, And there is money. But the funny thing is, the investors aren't going to invest in like a pilot of 10 chargers. They want 1,000, 2,000 chargers. It's got to be at scale. So one of my messages that I've been giving to mayors and directors of city agencies, I'm actually meeting with one tomorrow, is like, go big. Big is more practical. This is not an experiment anymore, right? Let's do it. And the private sector will get the money to do it if we write the RFP properly, or do an RFI, get all the responses, and go to contract with the best actors.
Well, that makes a lot of sense there. Then on the other leg of that stool is the utilities. How do utilities think about L2 charging today versus the big fast stuff where they're going to make a lot of money on it? How are they thinking about the L2?
They love it. They don't necessarily love having more things on their poles. And not all L2 chargers are pole based. They're sensitive about pole attachments, about weight, blah, blah, blah. But most of them also have goals around electrification. And they love L2 versus DC fast charging because it's not putting a strain on their grid, right? So when we get to the point where we have large numbers of fleet vehicles on L2 chargers, most will be on private property, but they could be on public space as well. That's when we start to see managed charging really come into its own. We start to see vehicle to grid really happening. And you see more happening on the West Coast right now, California, Washington State. But NYSERDA in New York is very keen on this as well, and ComEd. So, and once you get there, it's like there's no turning back. Once people understand the power of vehicle to home and vehicle to grid, managed charging, the ability to make money using your vehicle as the backup battery, like it's going to be an absolute game changer.
What's it going to take to unlock it, to get the game changing? And to me, I can say, okay, you've got the natural gas, people for when the power comes. Oh no, we don't want that. No, you can't use your car. We got to stop that. That whole the generate. Let's call the generators. We'll say, oh no, you can't do that. What's it going to take to really unlock the V2G?
I mean, it's really interesting. I was out at a industry dinner recently and ran into some folks from Kia, and I didn't realize this before I was talking to them. They have like 3 models that are completely vehicle to grid ready now, including the new EV6. So the new version of it. So you have that. You have the Ford Lightning, now you'll have the extended range version of that. But like, there are vehicles that are capable now. What we really need a standard to ensure interoperability and reliability for vehicle to grid. And I've been working a little bit with a new organization that stood up called EVCAN, and it's evcan.org. They're a nonprofit, and they are working on the utility side to create a standard that takes into account OCPI and OCPP and 802 dash whatever, all the things that SAE does such a wonderful job with, and build them into an overarching technical specification for utilities, and then a qualified product list for companies that can get certified as vehicle to grid ready. And so I think that's really exciting. And we have this sort of downtime right now in where we have the federal government sort of not paying attention. We will have an election later this year, then we'll have a presidential election, and stuff will shift probably into high gear again. So having these standards in place is really important.
Could you see a scenario where, let's just say the consumer has 90% charged in their vehicle, they pull up to the curb and say, okay, I'm willing to sell back 20%, and let's take it down to 70%. They can either get their parking for free or they can get paid for that. Do you see any of those type scenarios playing into the whole curb model, where they're selling it back to the city?
That is such a cool idea. See, I'm glad I came today because I'm like learning something. Seriously, that's a great idea. I hadn't thought about like on the spot, like, hey, I need $10. I'm going to sell back. I've been thinking more like, you'll sort of set parameters, right? And it'll sell back at those parameters. But there's nothing stopping what you described from happening. And my guess is what will happen when we have true vehicle to grid and communication between the vehicle and the charger and the utility will say, hey, we're hitting peak air conditioning time now, or we're hitting, evening usage of, people's washers and dryers or whatever. And like, we're going to take up our rate that we're buying back from 6 to 8. And it'll alert you either on your phone, through your app, or in your car. Would you be willing to sell back 10%? I totally see that happening. And then for folks at their homes with vehicle to grid capable charging and the utility set up to do it, I think it'll just be an ongoing conversation, right, between your vehicle and the charger and the utility, and it'll just maximize earnings for you if that's what you are focused on, and make sure that you have the charge you need the next day, because the AI will read your calendar. It'll know, oh, you're only going to work and it's only 3 miles. We can sell back, down to like 20%, 30%, right? And then we'll charge it up. So that's where like AI is sort of interesting.
Because think about it, changes it to make it to, if you want to do the term gamify it. Okay, so if you sell back X amount of energy, it pays for your charger and install. Okay, that's great. That's paid for, and it's practical, realistic things that people can get around to. The concern that I have is, okay, you have an L2 charger at home, and let's call it a V to G charge out. Oh crap! Now I got to go get this. There has to be some sort of trade-in program where if you take the old one out, you get some sort of credit, and then all suddenly, let's just say the price arb is $150. Okay, well, if you give back energy, you get it back. Oh, okay, great. The payback period. And if you make it really simple to consumers to understand it, and it's like, oh, I can lower my electric bill. Oh, hell yeah, have fun. I'll play price arb all day with you.
Well, yes, you're 100% right. And so when I was saying you can't rely on the federal government, it means like instead of figuring out what incentives can we line up that will be consistent over time and build our business around that, let's think the way Grayson's thinking about, like, how do we set up a business model where no matter what the federal government does, I mean, we hope they do these things, maybe to, regulate or deregulate the utility industry, whatever it is that we hope they do. But no matter what, we can get to profitability by removing the friction to get these things into people's hands, in their homes. We can monetize that. Like, we can basically arbitrage on the energy cost, and by year 7 we're at this payback, and then we can go out and get money for that. And if it's profitable enough, you don't even have to just go to VCs, right? You can go get some debt because you're confident enough in the future without the federal government's backing. Now, China, they don't have to do that. But this is land of the free, home of the brave, stand on your own 2 feet, individualism. So we got to think more like Grayson.
Oh, nice. You got to try different business models. And putting this all together, Gabe, in your opinion, what does the future of a city look like?
Yeah. I mean, I think cities are going to be denser because we need housing. They will be greener because I don't think we'll need as much space for transportation infrastructure. I think transportation will be a smaller percentage in an ideal world of the total cost of living. And I think that vehicle ownership, except for the very rich, will probably be a thing of the past. And transportation will be more of a utility / fun, meaning I'm just trying to get to point A to point B, whether it's an Apple pod or a Tesla pod or a Waymo pod. I don't really care too much. But sometimes I want to ride a shared electric bike. It's the only way I can control my own destiny, driving through a city. And I'm getting the health benefits. It's nice to be outside. Or I'm going to walk. Or I'm going to take the bus because I want the flexibility of taking the bike home or whatever. So, and I think your taxes will cover a lot of your municipal shared mobility, the transit, the bike share, right? And you'll think of it sort of as a mobility wallet, and you'll pay your 10 grand in taxes, and you'll have $1,000 of transportation usage. And that's, I think, where we're going to go. I mean, when you go to Northern Europe, transportation costs almost nothing, Housing's expensive, but between the trams and the bike share and all the infrastructure that they've built, it's really not expensive to get around.
So do you think it all comes down to optionality and choice?
In America, yes. And I think that, we love choices here. And we also have a lot of different land uses, as they do in other countries. But like when you look at central Paris, 4% of people are driving. So like there, whether autonomous robotaxis come or not isn't actually that consequential anymore because they've made different land use decisions than we have, right? Here, the car has been king for a long time. In cities, it's changing a lot. And I think that now we have like a mesh network, if you will, of mobility options. And like I've got like 3 or 4 different options if I want to go downtown right now. And honestly, driving my own car is the least appetizing. And so, yeah. And like, how do you reduce the friction even more? So the things that you want people to do as, let's say, the government, like you have this MAHA movement, which is all about like get people to move, get people to eat healthier. Well, the transportation system is a huge part of making people move. And so if we want to incentivize or gamify or get people to walk or bike or walk to the bus or whatever, we can do that now, whether it's through Google and Google Maps or transit app. And you've got the private sector, they figured out how to make money in micromobility, right? Uber is actually turning a profit now. So like these mobility options, as they become primary versus these also ran things, and they become big enough at scale, then they can make money. And that's where we are now, which is super duper exciting, I think.
Yeah, it's scale which unlocks the choices. You said this earlier. Without the scale, you really can't do much. You think when you'd use the term earlier, go big, you have to go big. Otherwise, the investors have no interest in it. And the consumer's going to be, wah, wah. I can only go a mile and I need to go 3 miles. But there's a lot of stuff changing in today's. This has been a fascinating conversation, Gabe. And as we look to wrap up, what would you like our listeners to take away with them today?
I was watching the Super Bowl last night and, Bad Bunny. I'd like to think of him as Good Bunny, even though I don't speak Spanish. But I found the whole thing fascinating and positive. I think we got to stay positive. This is a tough time right now. It's dark, from the standpoint of how we're viewed around the world, stepping back from innovation, stepping back from engaging around the world. Look, for every action, as I was saying, there's a reaction. And I think what I'm hoping for, like you have the abundance movement, a lot of people are trying to figure out where we're going to land. I hope that we land in a place where we're very pro people, pro long-term sustainability of the environment, and long-term sustainable business models and businesses. Like we don't have to be at odds all the time, and that's sort of what we're being sold right now. Is like, this is bad, this is good. Tons of binary choices. This is terrible, this is wonderful. The reality is the world's a little gray, right? And even electrifying cars, some of my urban planning friends are like, but we don't need more cars. But the ones we have, we need to electrify, right? So I hope we swing back to a little bit of a middle state and we don't go too extreme left, extreme right. And we find a way to work together. The work that SAE is doing, the technical standards, like all that stuff is going to be the backbone for this next movement that we're going to make. We're going to need utilities and auto companies and bike companies, actually, and cities to all work together. And I have a lot of hope that we can band together. I see cities working with cities, states working with states, international regions, like in Northern Europe, working with regions here on the East Coast and the West Coast, in the absence of federal leadership and stability. And so I think it's a time to get ready for the next big shift. And it's going to be exciting.
There's exciting times. I'll summarize this way. Stay focused on building the future because you never know when the right time is. So always build. Today is tomorrow. Tomorrow is today. The future is the curb. Gabe, thank you so much for coming on SAE Tomorrow Today.
Thank you so much, Grayson, and SAE.
Thank you for listening to SAE Tomorrow Today.
If you've enjoyed this episode and would like to hear more, please kindly rate, review, and let us know what topics you'd like for us to explore next. Be sure to join us next week as we speak with SAE J3311 committee members about the newly published standard and how it enables vehicle-wide power optimization.
SAE International makes no representations as to the accuracy of the information presented in this podcast. The information and opinions are for general information only. SAE International does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast.